Howdy, everyone. Kazi here, back with Judd. And today we're going to be talking about some pretty significant tank tuning that's coming. Some that's coming on the reset on Tuesday, as well as some that's coming on the PTR. While we do that, we're going to be talking through a 20 Nok'hud Offensive from this week on Tyrannical. So we'll kind of go through how we're running that dungeon, some of the stuff we're looking at, and kind of some tips and tricks along the way. So, kind of to get started off with that, the first pull that we're doing is this patrol that kind of pats along the outside. And the reason that we're doing that first is it's a really nice place to get your lust on cooldown early. So we hit the ground, everyone's got full cooldowns up, we've got lust, and we just completely burn this pack. As long as you've got the kicks here and the stop on Rally the Clan, and preferably a kick or a stop on the Beastmaster's targeting ability where he's putting a mark on a target, this pack isn't too dangerous, but having a Death Knight there definitely makes it a little bit easier. Then we're going to kind of go through and make the rest of the rounds on the inside here, being careful with the frontal cleaves. But that's kind of the most important pulls on those, or most important stops are your kicks on the Lance Masters and your stops on the Horn Sounders that are doing that Rally the Clans cast.
And one note on this pack, and the reason why you want to do the pat first is that pat really goes right up into this pack, and so the outside, I think it's longbow shooter there, will actually like aggro the pat as it goes by if you're attacking it. So if you don't have a grip or some way to place it in, you'll actually get the pat along with this pack if you start there. Which honestly, if you're ready for it and you've got the stops assigned, you can double this up. We actually ran this on a 21 the night after this 20. I'm not even in this dungeon actually, but we did run it on a 21. And we combined those two packs into one pull with Lust, and it worked pretty well. We had a couple deaths, but we were able to, kill it without wiping.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So then we're going to finish off the pack here in the middle and then kind of go around dragon to each of the lances before we actually engage Granith. But kind of starting to get in with probably the least or the lesser of the buffs that are coming through. Vengeance Demon Hunter is getting some defensive buffs.
Yeah, and what we're seeing here with all these changes is the couple of tank classes kind of at the bottom defensively right now, which is weird to say that about Vengeance Demon Hunter, based on kind of where it started out in the beta cycle to where it is right now. But it is one of the weaker tanks probably defensively. It takes quite a bit of damage. It's pretty rough outside of its cooldowns. There's a window with no meta and kind of no spikes up that can happen, which you're maybe even kiting a little bit. At least that's kind of how I was when I was playing it. And we're seeing a little bit of buffs to Vengeance Demon Hunter as well as Brewmaster Monk, which Brewmaster has kind of been known to be the glass cannon tank right now. Vengeance is getting just a slight kiss. It's not really a big buff, just a little bit to the let me pull it up here. The calcified spikes is getting just like a 2% buff. So when your demon spikes in, normally you'd get a 10% damage reduction. Now it's a 12% damage reduction. You're getting a 1% extension on Painbringer as well, which is when you consume your lesser soul fragments. This is going to give you a 1% damage reduction per fragment absorbed. So getting an extra second on that is kind of accounts to probably a little extra, like 1-2% damage reduction overall. And then kind of I don't know if it's the bigger one, but it looks like a bigger number, is just an increased passive armor by 15%. So your thick skin is going from 100% bonus armor to 130% bonus armor. And again, overall, this is probably just a small increase in the defensiveness of Demon Hunter. It does pretty good damage right now, and I'm maining it, so it's viable. But right now, is with the latest nerfs over the last couple patches, right before launch, right before the season, with the hunt getting nerfed, and a lot of things that kind of in the class tree that attacked Havoc also affected Vengeance Demon Hunter. And we're actually seeing where it looked like it was one of the stronger tanks going into the season, and actually got nerfed down to kind of looking like one of the bottom tier tanks, kind of just above Brewmaster. So it's good to see some love.
Yeah, Vengeance is one of those tanks where a lot of times they're really strong, but kind of the strength of the class and their survivability has a whole lot to do with the tuning. There's not a whole lot of different buttons you can press and tools that you have to really be creative with kind of your damage mitigation. You're kind of in a situation where it's either tuned to be tanky or it's not. And if it's not, there's not a whole lot you can do to play around with it. And a lot of the patch cycle, it was tuned to be incredibly tanky, but as we saw later in the patch cycle, when some of those nerfs started to come through, it definitely took a pretty big hit.
Yeah, and really, just with playing the class, is you almost find yourself like, oh, I don't want to press Fel Dev offensively because I know I might need it here in a second. But then again, if you're not pressing offensively, I mean, it's very drain tanky, right? So it's this cycle of needing to do damage to kind of heal yourself. Well, now you're kiting, and now you're not doing damage, and you're not building frailty stacks when you're kiting. So what happens when those mobs now reach you? They have no frailty stacks, and they are just going to smash you. So when you do, especially during Raging Week, and you're kiting away with the Demon Hunter, you want to make sure that you have, like, you're only going to kite away if you don't have Feldev ready and you don't have Demon Spikes, or at least Demon Spikes is running down, right? And you know you're not going to get Feldev in, and you're going to feel like you're going to be weak for a moment there. So you kite away, wait for Feldev to come back up as the mobs are coming to you. Just Feldev them, now you're in meta, you start building back your frailty stacks back up, and now you're back in the cycle where your spikes should be coming back up. And that's kind of what I'm finding is I'm most successful in these keys, especially during Raging Week, where they hit harder at the end, and you're definitely the most fragile at the end of the pull as opposed to the beginning. And I just think that's the way you need to play the class right now.
Something I wanted to point out on Granith, which is one of the easier bosses, is that as you get to higher tyrannical keys, the most damage that you're taking in this fight group wide is going to be the shards of stone. So you see here in a second, the first shard of stone is going to go off, and that is going to hit incredibly hard. It's going to chunk people down to about 50% or 40% health or less. If you wait until the very last second to use this lance, you're going to end up taking another shard of stone before the eruption starts. But if you use the lance as soon as it becomes available, you actually skip that shard of stone and essentially have the number of shards of stone that you see in the fight. That's why it's important to immediately use the lance as soon as it's available, rather than kind of waiting and giving it a little bit of extra time before you use it.
Yeah, it does still cancel his cast the eruption cast, even if you use it before he starts casting. You can just slam that thing right away, like he's doing here. Yep.
And you saw if you watch the timeline there, you can see the Shard of Stone cast being canceled as well. Moving on to the second boss area, we've started really like preferring to pull this pack at the top of the ramp as the first pack that we do. Reason for that being that after you're coming off Granite and a period where everyone's kind of kiting for a while, everyone's got cooldowns back up. And this is probably the hardest of the packs, or at least one of the harder packs. The arc blades in here, I'm not doing a very good job of it early because I'm trying to keep everything really clumped. In this group, I've got a DK and a paladin who both have their offensive stuff down on the ground and get really angry if I kite too much. But these arcing strikes, I could be doing a much better job. You see I took 2 in a row there. If you just kite out of range a little bit when those come out, you can actually completely skip those abilities and not take any damage from them all. They don't recast. So a little bit of a tip there. I think I did a little bit better here throughout the rest of it.
Yeah, they're in every pack, so that's especially if you, like you said, you had classes where there's stuff on the ground. If you're in a group that doesn't really have that restriction, kite away.
Yeah.
Just make sure you get the kicks though too. There's a volley on the named mob in each of these that you want to make sure you get. I think it's the volley, right? Or is this one just the storm?
No, this one's just a single target. The storm.
Okay.
Always on the next sets, but and try and tank these as much as possible on top of the storm totem. Storm totems can't bleed, so sometimes there's some classes that don't damage them very well. So the more cleave you're able to get onto those totems, the quicker you reduce the amount of AoE damage going out in these pulls and make them a lot safer.
And I think you really, I know in my groups, I've been wanting to kill the totem first, ideally, just to get rid of it.
It stops the AoE damage as long as you're able to keep up a good kick rotation on the other stuff. And you can't hear it right now, but on these pulls where there are a lot of priority, or where there are a lot of interrupts, I'm generally calling every single interrupt. Who's interrupting what. That way we aren't overlapping. It's like I'll call, I'm getting that one. Next one's going to be Sangoon or whatever the case may be. That on a pack where there's only one interrupt, it doesn't really matter. But when you start getting into some of these ones where there's a whole lot of them, kind of having that orchestrated and organized saves you a lot of trouble. The chain lightning there, you saw that it did unenraged. It did about 30% of the paladin's health there. Once he enrages, there's one on a 21. I think it did 90% of our healer's health in one tick. So that's a really good thing to to watch out for Soothe if you can, and make sure that if you are targeted with it, you get out of the pack. It is possible to skip this pack. They pat around the outside. It becomes really
I wouldn't
dicey.
recommend it.
It becomes really dicey when you're doing the boss, and everyone has to have their head on a swivel the entire time you're fighting the Raging Tempest. Definitely on a tyrannical key where they don't have as much health, it makes a lot more sense to kill it. On a fortified key, if you're really confident in your group's awareness, then maybe you consider that because they aren't necessarily the most efficient mobs. But
I think if you have that, I just think you combine it with one of these trash packs here. You just, like you said, you need to make sure you have the extra kick assigned.
yeah.
So yeah, I think it's 2 extra kicks. You need 2 assigned to the big boy there.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the other tank that's getting some love this week, well, both this week and on the PTR, is Brewmaster. So like I said, they're getting some stuff in the immediate fix, and then some stuff on the PTR changes coming through as well.
Yeah. So the immediate fix is what Brewmaster mains have been calling for. At least one of the notices the weak spots in their kit is the magic damage stagger, and this is being increased by a full 10%. So it's going from 35% magic damage stagger to 45% magic damage stagger, which I think is huge. Like, I'll be interested to test this out on Tuesday. I have been running a little bit of Monk, just kind of baby keys though. I haven't really been pushing on it. I certainly haven't been maining or ulting or anything like that. I've been playing Vengeance Demon Hunter, and then I've recently picked up the Prot Warrior just because they're so strong. But I think these buffs to Brewmaster are huge. So increased magic damage stagger is looking great. You've got your Celestial Brew cooldown was also reduced. So baseline 45 seconds, which with light brewing brings it down to 36 seconds. So that's monstrous huge. I mean, you're just going to have Ancestral Brew is huge to begin with, just a big shield. And just to constantly have these big shields. I can see even on the screen here, you're running Icon. Like, that's really good on Brewmaster for extra shielding as a defensive trinket. I mean, this is just putting Brewmaster in a good spot. It already does like a ton of damage. Like, I hope this doesn't make it so tanky that they just now got to come after their damage because they're just too strong. I don't know if that'll do it to the class or not. Those are the changes for Tuesday. A couple other changes. They're getting a bit of a talent tree. I don't want to say rework, but just a slight adjustment, you might say. And they're getting a new talent called Spirit of the Ox. Now, these changes aren't Tuesday. These are on the PTR, and will be in 10.0.5. Spirit of the Ox is a new ability. So when you Blackout Kick or Rising Sun Kick, you have a chance to create a Gift of the Ox Orb, which is supposed to be an 8 proc per minute, and then scales with haste. A Brewmaster doesn't really run a lot of haste, so it'll be interesting to see kind of how many orbs you're actually getting. But even if you're just getting like one every 8 to 10 seconds, probably 8 seconds, in addition to your Gift of the Ox orbs, which is pretty strong. Like, it's kind of interesting to talk about this because Gift of the Ox actually received a little bit of a nerf with the last changes with Brewmaster getting extra stamina. And it's kind of been bounced around a little bit where, like, you increase their stamina. Okay, well, Gift of the Ox gets nerfed. They reduce everybody's healing as well, and they have a lot of AP-based healing, which nerf their kit quite a bit. But then you saw, like, well, when that happens, abilities like Healing Elixir get a little bit stronger. And same thing, like the 11% buff to their health. Well, Healing Elixir is a % health-based heal. You see it get a little bit stronger. So it's kind of like this pull, almost this... you kind of adjust one knob, and then another knob gets adjusted because of that with Brewmaster. But all in all, I think this is it's looking really good. I guess I need to get in the rest of these the talent tree changes because this is huge. We're going to put it up on the screen here. Yeah.
Yeah, real quick before we do that, though, I do want to talk a little bit here about Raging Tempest. A couple things to point out. One is this Windburst. It is spell reflectable, so I don't know if you saw the number. I just intentionally ran out of melee a little bit there to bait one on cooldown, and that hit for 560k. Then that one I was a little too far out grabbing Orb and didn't have it, and it hit me for about 3/4 of my health. So as a warrior, being able to spell reflect that can be absolutely huge damage over the course of the fight. That's by far my highest damage. And I think last night when we did on the 21, when we killed this boss, I think overall it did 4 million damage during the boss fight, which is absolutely huge. So that's, if you got a warrior, that's absolutely great. If not, if you have a tank that isn't a warrior, they need to make damn sure that they're staying in range.
Yeah, we unfortunately did not kill this on the 21. RIP.
Yeah.
We did an 18 afterwards. We definitely killed it on the 18, but not on the
We
21.
brought some people who weren't quite as geared to that one. Um, but the energy surge is another thing to mention here. It's a dispellable or a purgeable buff that the boss gives himself. It did recently receive a 50% nerf, which makes it at least survivable if you let it stay on there for a little while. But this is definitely a dungeon where if you have the ability to bring a purge for that, it can be pretty helpful. The other aspect of it is the importance of these buffs. So pretty quickly into the fight, you get your first electrical storm.
It's about 40 seconds in.
Right. So you want your healer to have 100% or have 10 stacks of the orbs by that point. That is the most important thing to living this fight, is that if the healer has those stacks, they have a chance of keeping you alive. If they don't, it's pretty much not going to happen.
Yeah, you're probably going to need to discuss healing cooldowns as well going into that, on which during the storms, like which one people are going to need to use personals on, which ones the healers are going to cover. In a pug situation, I just think the healer could say use defenses on the first one or use defenses on the second one or something like that, or at least try and get that information out of your group before you go into it. Because if you're just going to YOLO it, it could be rough. So that's all. You're going to run out of stuff pretty quick.
On these, pretty much all these mini boss pulls. So I don't really mind having these with the extra pad of birds. It can get a little dicey there. You see, we drop somebody. The most important kick by far on these are the named ad their AoE bolts. If you end up letting too many of those go off, they start hurting pretty bad. All of the other casters are going to be targeting your tank with their casts. So while those extra interrupts on those are nice, kicking the AoE stuff really drops the overall damage of the pack down by a whole lot. This is where we end up getting most of our count in the dungeon. The mobs in here, while they can be unforgiving if you stand in bad or get hit by frontals, they're ultimately significantly easier to deal with than the trash in most of the dungeon. So you'll see we get a lot of our trash here. When we did this on the 21, we actually had the Death Knight switch to Frost for this portion. The reason being is that the Mystics have a buff that they can put out that buffs their party's haste by 20%. So if a Death Knight mind controls one of them or take control undeads them, you can give that buff to your party. So running through this entire area, we grabbed one of the Mystics right off the bat, and then we just had a 20% haste buff for the entire time we were doing this trash.
Okay, so you guys didn't do that here. You didn't need to, I guess, or
we didn't need to, but he was playing Unholy and he wasn't set up to play Frost. Unholy loses a lot more from taking or controlling undead than Frost or Blood do. So if you have a Blood Death Knight or a Frost Death Knight, it's a really good option. Or even if you have an Unholy Death Knight who can swap to Frost, just zone out, swap specs, and then come back. That can be pretty helpful for getting through this area with a little bit of extra damage.
Yeah, we've been talking about a lot lately, but this dungeon's definitely a Blood Death Knight dungeon. I know you've mentioned it. I know other content creators have mentioned it. This is there's a lot of cool things you can do with Blood Death Knight just for mob control, and then like you said, mind control in this Mystic is a pretty cool trick in there as well. Plus a lot of the magic damage. It's just Death Knight handles a lot of this stuff in here really well.
Mm-hmm.
Except for this boss, of course, in this section. It's probably the worst boss for Blood Death Knight, but
well, as long as you're proactive, we'll talk about it a little bit when we get there. So hopping back in though to the upcoming PTR stuff for brewmasters. So we talked about the new Spirit of the Ox talent, but that they also gave some points back in the tree.
Yeah, let's just talk about the rework in the tree. They actually changed the pathing a little bit. So Stagger is now just a baseline talent, so you don't have to put a point into it. It was kind of odd that you had to put a point into it to begin with. I guess they just didn't want to make it like a baseline monk ability, but now it's baseline for Brewmaster. You don't have to put a point into Stagger. So that just completely removes that node from the tree. And I'm actually trying to take a look at it here while we talk about it here. That new Spirit of the Ox talent actually moves right below Shuffle and right next to Quick Sip. And Quick Sip got reworked. Instead of being a 2-point talent that does 1% reduction on your Purify per point, and now does 5% for just the 1 point. So that's kind of a huge buff for that, at least for that node. And what the rework does, and we got it on the screen here, Basically, if it makes it so that you need to make a decision between quick sip, spirit of the ox, gift of the ox, and healing elixir, and you're going to need to pick two of these, and you're gonna one of those is gonna have to be quick sip um, or spirit of the ox, because that's what's going to get you down into rushing jade wind. So a little bit of rework at the top. It kind of actually frees up some points. You're actually just kind of getting two extra abilities now that you can choose between, which is a good change, and it makes sense to have stagger just be a baseline ability because you're not going to be without it.
So this pull that we did, we doubled up here. On fortified, this probably isn't something you can double up. The or if you do double it up, the warrior mortal strike can now be stopped. We weren't dedicating stops to it here. We were dedicating the stops to the corruptors just to reduce the overall magic damage. A couple times though, that with I got a couple stacks of mortal strike and was kiting for my life right into a tornado there. So, gotta be if you're tanking this and you know that you've got that, you probably want to pick one of the warriors, and every time that the warriors go to do their mortal strike, cancel one of them. That way you're not taking the two stacks because that's pretty rough. So here with these mobs, these corruptors don't like moving very often. I do a lot of you want it. So basically, I pick one of them to tank on, and with these tornadoes and with some of the way this stuff's hitting, I'm kiting a decent amount. But I try to generally kite in a circle, so I'm keeping it relatively close to the consecration, relatively close to the defile or death and decay there. That way, we're not losing uptime on that for the DPS. So
Just saying, like a blood death knight grip would be really good in this
yeah,
situation.
blood death knight would be really strong there.
And then like they need to stand in their death and decay, so you'd probably kite in a way, which it'd be nice for consecrate as well. Yeah,
Right.
makes sense.
Yep. So that kind of gets us through most of this trash. We got the one pack left. You can try to prioritize clearing the mounds a little bit sooner, but like the big thing here is that you want to be clearing the last mound and starting the last boss as Lust is coming off cooldown. See, we're pretty close to that timing. We'll clear this last pack, and we should be in good shape. This is another one that we doubled. It isn't too much dangerous. The Mystic ideally gets kicked if you're not mind controlling it. Otherwise, it's buffing your party quite a bit. It can also be blood elfed off though, purged. So that's what we end up going with here. And then the Beast Collar kind of adds a necessary kick or stop there as well. But this is still a doable pull on Tyrannical to double it up.
Yeah, and you just need the one melee kick on the beast color. It's not a frequent cast, so that's not too bad.
Everything else is going to go into the named mob, the Lieutenant's Death Bowl Volley, just to reduce the overall AoE damage here. So that, let's see, did we covered gifted the
We didn't really talk much about dungeon nerfs. Yeah, I think that's good on Monk. I think Monk's gonna be in a pretty good spot. I mean, it was already like, I mean, it's not competitive. It's not very popular. It's the least popular spec, but like the top level monks are pretty much hanging with the big boys and the other specs. So it's interesting to see you give them a little bit more defensive tools. I mean, they already do a ton of damage, just way more damage than any other tank.
Right. And we're still pretty early in the season. The thing is, like with Race to World First for raids, that the season picks up really early for those, and that's kind of the start of the season. That's when you see a lot of the really good competition. A lot of times with Mythic Plus, when you start getting the real competition is towards the end of the season when people have had time to roll multiple characters, figure out what was best, figure out the right group composition, and start to min max some of that gear on a couple of characters. And as we start getting towards the end of the season, I think there's a good chance that we start to see an emergence of some of these other tanks. Whereas right now, Warrior is definitely the flavor of the month. I think it's very possible that we could see a little bit of a change to that, or at least a rise in popularity of some of the other tanks. Looking at like Blood DK and maybe now Brewmaster as well.
So, yeah, and in like an MDI setting, which is kind of what we've been talking about as we're sort of prepping for that. With just the damage Brewmaster does, if it can live, like it's going to be, you think it's got to be the best tank in most of those settings. Like and spots where you talked about like spell reflect being pretty cheesy and like being able to do crazy amounts of damage in some of these dungeons. Like maybe that means that Warrior's the play, but like with brewmaster with that AoE damage, like it's almost like you can funnel some of your single target damage onto some of your DPS players instead. If your tank's going to do that much AoE damage.
An interesting. So right now the healing meta has kind of evolved into Resto Druid
Oh,
and
what are you doing there?
Preservation.
Ooh,
I
sorry, I
was
got
moving out a little
distracted.
bit.
No, so
I was
actually here
dodging
I'm
tornadoes.
gonna distract you right here because like with those gale arrows there, it's something to talk about on this boss. It's gonna happen again before the boss is over, but you can see everybody stacks up there, and you weren't quite stacked up. You were a little bit off of it.
No, I'd already taken the brutalized damage though. That had already chunked me. I didn't get hit by any tornadoes.
Okay, it looked like you were about to take about
Right.
8 tornadoes to the face as you were running backwards.
I'd step back to dodge them because I couldn't because I was dodging a thundering tornado.
Got to keep those bosses close together
Um,
during that point. That's kind of a hard spot to keep them together when they all that
True.
stuff's
One
on the
thing
ground.
they did increase Maruk's speed a little bit, which actually makes getting him back
That
together.
helps.
When you move to tier, Maruk closes the gap a little faster, so you're less likely to have them spread out.
There's
They
gale
also
arrows again. They're gonna stack.
there used to be the Gale arrow directly into quick shot, which would one shot somebody. Now you have about a second and a half, 2 seconds for the healer to recover a little bit. We still dedicated our AoE defensives to each of the Gale shots. That's pretty much the only thing that's going to kill you here. As I get hit by a tornado and try to kill myself.
Yeah, it still does a crazy amount of damage, even if you're all stacked up. And it doesn't do more damage since you're stacked up. It just does a lot of damage to everyone. So obviously being stacked up for healing is helpful. And then being stacked up for the tornadoes, they all go out together. Obviously very helpful.
Right, and there's always a leap before the tornadoes come back. So if you're all stacked up on the she'll leap out, and then you also just naturally dodge the tornadoes that are coming back in. So.
And you can see there's a little white glow on the ground where she's going to leap to. So that way you always know where you're going. And it's always best to pre-move over there. Some classes, obviously, you can just jump over there when warriors can. Obviously, with Blood Death Knight, when we talked about how this is a Blood Decay dungeon, you need to start hoofing it over there. See, she just jumped over there. Warrior, no problem, just charged. But if you got to run that way, you want to start pre-moving.
I'm going to step back about 10 seconds. You'll see that right before she leaps, she actually turns in the direction she's going to leap. And that's the first indication. So if you watch her, she will turn and face the middle of the room and start leaping. So then you can know immediately, hey, okay, it's that way. I go back that way after dodging the tornadoes. Get there okay. So that's kind of, if you're going to die on this boss, though, it's going to be the Gale arrows. So making sure, again, we assign when it's going to be personal defenses, when Aura Mastery is going to cover it, when it's going to be a rally, those kinds of things. So those are all preset that way. When we get there, it's not a big deal. And with that,
and that's pretty rough too, where you need to get this interrupt here. Like DKs are really good at that as well. Hey, DK dungeon, Des Advance, you don't get pushed back, you just interrupt it. Also, any range kicked is good as well as Demon Hunters have increased range on their kick. Pretty easy to get as well.
Right, you can see the cast being finished. So on that one, I actually kicked as the cast finished, and I got knocked back a little bit, but I still got the interrupt before I got blasted out of position. So I didn't end up, like, even with the melee kick, I was able to get it beforehand.
Yeah, do you pull up your map here? Or maybe you can in editing.
I don't.
But so
this is,
we need to talk about this for sure. For those of you that don't know, this is 100% the route you want to take. Notice that we're at, what are you at? You should be at 94% count. You're a little bit higher. You want to be at least 94.6. I don't remember the exact number. It's like 90. It's about 94% though, really. Okay, 93 and some change. Whatever this last two count to, I think they're like
I think they're
3.4 or something percent. Do you ever over? Anyway,
so you can see we were close on the timer here.
3.08%.
So we went ahead and decided to double this up. It almost worked. So had we had Lust to dedicate to this phase, I think it would have worked. We're a minute off on Lust. I'm also a little slow to get the boss moved over to the rock over here where we want to tank it, but that's just kind of the way the timing works out. The big thing with this, if you're going to double it up, you need to have both of these mobs down before you push the boss to the intermission. So you have to focus these ads down below 60% before.
You need to kill them before the boss gets to 60%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And these guys do add a lot of damage onto your tank. And this phase of the fight before 60% is actually harder for the tank, in my opinion. than afterwards, because there's a couple of times where you've got rending strike, and then you're going to get the big savage strike right afterwards. This time with it, when it's just those, it's not a big deal. I'm able to get my ignore pain to cover most of it. Isn't a big deal. This next time, I think we're going to get the rending strike into the savage strike and then into the eruption, and that's really where you're in danger here as a tank. I've because of the fact that we have this extra damage going out, I've pretty much run myself dry of cooldowns. And
Demo
I'm
shout
late
for
calling.
rage.
I'm late calling for
There it
something.
is.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
you end up dying?
yeah.
I actually haven't seen this yet. This is my first time seeing this.
So we end up being able to finish off the 2 ads, but right as we're finishing them off, I go down as well.
Ooh.
Yeah.
What's
So
your
that
impending victory?
on
Oh,
cooldown
it's
for
on
2
cooldown for
seconds.
3 more seconds. Yep. It's battle
Oh,
res.
yeah. There's the battle res. But we drop a couple more, and we end up not being able to get it. Ends up being kind of the difference of us timing this and not, so we end up missing the key by a little bit. But we do get them down. But that overlap where you get the 3 together, so you get the rending strike into brutal strike into eruption, that's where it's really dangerous. In our group, we brought the DK. We really like bringing the DK to Nok'hud Offensive. Even for this next part, having grippy hands for the intermission here is really huge. So you see, I also am talented into AoE silence here. So we're going to start with the grip, and then an AoE silence, and then these are all silenced until they're already down to 50% by the time this goes out. Then it's just making sure that you're dodging, keeping the AoE stops up, and getting individual interrupts on all the little stuff. If you don't have a Death Knight, this is the angle's probably to go ahead and CC 2 of the ads.
No, you just need to assign kicks to bring them in for sure, and then you need AoE CC.
Yeah, problem is the ones that are on the outside. The ones that are on the outside require 2 kicks to bring all the way in. So
Yeah, you're gonna need something to bring them in. I mean, you need like a monk rop or something, or like some sort of displacement. You can have shamans, like a thunderstorm.
Rogue got targeted with the spear here, and vanished it. So any combat drops of vanish and greater invis, feign death, or shadow meld will work to drop that, and that's absolutely huge because you'll see we end up dropping a couple people here a little bit later on. This are the lightnings are the spear is a little bit bugged. Sometimes if you're moving, and see he just got one shot by that. Sometimes if you're moving while you're getting hit with the spear, it will hit you twice for some reason. So instead of getting hit once, you get hit twice, and then you get absolutely destroyed by it and get one shot.
Yep, can't get hit twice.
Right. So having that ability to drop it, I think that here the paladin gets hit twice by because he's takes a little bit of a step. Oh no, he bubbled it. All right. But that's what kind of becomes the dangerous part in this fight is whether or not if somebody gets one shot by those things. If not, with the tank here or the warriors here can spell reflect, conductive strike, or thunder strike.
Did you just go in your bags for?
What did I go in my bags?
Yeah, you just went in your bags and click something. Oh, drums.
Drum.
Uh-oh.
I was drumsing for the Death Knight because he was dead when we lusted the first time. Usually I have those on my bars, but I take them off my bars when we have a lust so that I don't mess it up.
We haven't really come up with one, but we definitely need a plan for where to put the storms on this phase to be able to keep the strike still going over that rock. So what's happening on? Did we even talk about it in the first phase? The way that storm works when he charges, you see he hit that rock right there, right, and stopped. You can basically do that throughout the entire fight. Every time he throws the spear, he's going to charge in the direction of the spear. So if you just put it on the other side of the rock, well, in this phase, when you drop these puddles right here, you want to make sure, number one, they hurt a lot. Number two, you want to make sure you don't clutter around that rock like is happening in this video here. So I think the best thing is probably it's going to be either to drop them off to the side or to just actually throw them in the middle.
Yeah.
Drop them off in the middle and then just try and work your way. But I don't know. Definitely need to keep that area clear.
The time the pally.
Yeah, the other way to go is if you just have him charge towards the fence. Like if you just have one direction that you always have him going, it's just better for muscle memory, or it's just better to have things like that assigned. We're always going to take it to the fence, and that way everybody knows, hey, the charge is coming out. even if he needs to use a movement ability or something to get over there, he does it last second. You know he's going there no matter what, or he's wrong. You know.
Yep.
Yeah. GG. Another week and another untimed key that we're showing you guys.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. We'll see you in the next one. We'll see you next week, and good luck pushing keys.
Yep. Bye bye.